At WinOwl, we tell the kind of stories that don't always look good in the family photo album. Stories that hurt, but that can also wake something up inside you that's been asleep for a long time. If you already know this little corner, you know we talk without makeup, without perfection filters. And if this is the first time you're listening to me, I want to invite you to stay, and, while you're at it, to subscribe to the WinOwl channel, hit like on this video, and share it with someone who needs to sit with what family really means. I mean it, subscribe now, before we get started, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just a random story to kill some time. It's the story of a 76-year-old woman who ended up living on the street, abandoned by the 2 children she raised, and rescued by the daughter she'd had to give up for adoption. It's also the story of a daughter who became famous online, an influencer who turned her mother's pain into a message for millions, and of a man, me, who watched all of that up close, with more coldness than he'd like to admit. If you stay until the end, you're going to have to decide whether what we did was the right thing, or if, deep down, we just dressed something up as inspiration that was also, in its own way, exploitation. And I want you to tell me in the comments, calmly, like we were talking alone, in the middle of the night. Because if there's one thing I learned from this story, it's that abandonment doesn't always end when somebody leaves. Sometimes it ends when, many years later, someone dares to come back or not to come back. My name is Daniel. I'm 34. I'm a film and video producer, one of those people who live behind the camera, hidden in the dim light of the edit suite while other people show their faces. My job is to put other people's stories in order. Cut, paste, clean up uncomfortable silences, make life look more coherent than it really is. And for the last 4 years, I've been Alejandra's partner. Alejandra, the influencer. Maybe you've already seen her at some point, sliding past on your screen while your thumb kept scrolling. Or maybe you're one of her followers. She's one of those faces that sticks in your mind, big, intense eyes, a practiced, studied smile, but with something genuine underneath. A strange mix of girl who survived something hard and woman who learned to turn that wound into a flag. When I met her, she was already known. Not tabloid famous, but known enough that people recognized her at a cafe, asked for photos at the supermarket, sent her long messages pouring out their family problems. Alejandra talked about personal growth, self-esteem, healing wounds, relationships. And behind all of that, there was a secret that, at first, was barely mentioned: she was adopted. Let me ask you something, just to start. If you found out in your 20s that your entire life had been built on a decision other people made for you, what would you do? Would you look for your biological mother, or would you rather not know? Alejandra chose to look. She found out she was adopted at 15, but she didn't get access to the full paperwork until she was 24. Her adoptive parents, good people, but fearful, avoided the topic as much as they could. They said they loved her like a biological daughter, and that was true, but they were terrified of losing her if they opened that door. That night when they finally handed her the folder with her story, I remember it by the way she told it to me later. The brittle plastic of the file, the smell of paper that had been stored for decades, the name of a woman who, without knowing it, had marked her life: Lourdes. Lourdes, without an H. A simple name. Rural. A name from another time. Inside the folder there were basic details: date of birth, Lourdes' shaky signature consenting to the adoption, an old address that doesn't exist anymore the way it was written, and a dry little note: single mother, 2 previous children, no means to support the youngest. When Alejandra showed me all that, we were sitting in my living room, the lights low, the laptop screen lighting up our faces. She held the pages as if they were fragile, as if any sudden movement might erase the ink. She gave her up so she could have a better life, she said, like she was talking about someone else. So that I could have a better life. She went quiet for a moment and then looked at me. That look was like a slow hit. Dark, sad, but with a determination I knew well, because I'd seen it every time she decided to turn one of her own experiences into content. I have to find her, Danny. Even if it's just to see her once. That's where everything started. So I'll throw it back to you: if your partner said that to you, would you support them, even knowing it could break something in the family they already have? Or would you try to stop them for their own good? Me, with my cold survivor style, said yes. That I'd help her. And I said it with that analytical calm I sometimes seem to have built in by default. Inside, of course, I was scared of what she'd find, scared that the search would make her stumble over old pains she thought she'd already worked through. The first attempts were bureaucratic. Cold offices, counters staffed by exhausted people, standard responses: the file is in central archives, we can't release more information without a court order. There were also dusty streets, addresses that had turned into new apartment buildings, little corner shops that didn't exist anymore. And always, at every step, that strange feeling of chasing a ghost. A name on a piece of paper. Meanwhile, our relationship was growing. The romance, if you want to call it that, wasn't a lightning bolt. It was more of a slow, almost strategic, drawing closer. I was working on the production of some of her videos, and at first it was strictly professional. Eyes focused on the monitor, adjusting lighting, suggesting better framing. But there were moments, small, almost insignificant, that just hung in the air. Like when we'd review takes sitting very close, practically in the same chair, shoulder to shoulder, our knees just barely touching. I could feel the warmth of her leg, the brush of her arm, the soft smell of her shampoo. She'd lean her head toward the screen and her hair would graze my cheek. It wasn't obvious, it wasn't urgent. It was a quiet kind of tension, contained. The kind of tension that makes you suddenly aware of your own breathing. Have you ever felt that? That closeness that doesn't get named, but warms your chest from the inside. Over time, that gray zone started to clear. One marathon editing night, she rested her head on my shoulder while we waited for a video to export. I hesitated, then slipped my arm behind her back, carefully, without pulling her closer. She didn't move away. There weren't any big declarations. Just that shared silence, the blue glow of the screen on our faces, and two people who knew something was shifting. But this story isn't about how we fell in love. It's about how Lourdes appeared. Because for a long time, Lourdes was only that, a name in a folder, a smudged address, a past full of holes. Until, several years later, chance and social media did what they do. It was a Sunday. I remember because we just finished filming something light, one of those Q&A videos with her followers. Alejandra was tired, I was too. We collapsed on the couch, she started scrolling on her phone, like everyone does. Then suddenly, she froze. "Danny," she whispered. And that tone, that chill in her voice, made me turn. She showed me the screen. It was a short video, shaky phone footage recorded by someone on the street. An older woman, clothes dirty, hair tangled, sitting on a corner. She had a plastic bag by her side and was looking at the ground, not the camera. There was text over the image, "The granny everyone ignores downtown." The woman's face was worn, carved with deep wrinkles. But there was something in her bone structure, in the shape of her eyes, that felt familiar. Not to me, to Alejandra. "She looks like you," I dared to say. She didn't blink. She zoomed in with her fingers, like she could step inside the pixels. "Pause the video," I told her. I actually did it myself. There, in a single frame, the woman lifted her head, like someone had called her name. And in that gesture, in the way she furrowed her brow, it was impossible not to see it. Alejandra murmured. "She has the same wrinkle I do here. The one you say shows up when I'm angry." She touched her forehead, almost mechanically. "Let me ask you, would you believe in a coincidence like that? Or would you say it's just your mind seeing patterns that aren't there?" Alejandra isn't the type to sit with doubt. She tracked down the account that had posted the video, sent a private message, kept insisting until he replied. It was a guy who made content about social issues. He told her he'd been seeing that woman for more than a year in the same downtown area. He says they call her Lulu, Alejandra told me, voice low. That sometimes she talks to herself. That other times she mentions having had kids, but that they left her. The weight of those words stayed hanging between us. That was when she made a decision I still replay in my head to this day. She decided to use her social media to look for her. She posted a video. Not one of the pretty, well-lit ones. She recorded herself without makeup, her voice a little shaky, and said she was looking for her biological mother. She showed a clip from the guy's video where the woman could be seen. She didn't state anything as fact, she just said, "There's something about her that hurts. If anyone knows her, please write to me." I was behind the camera, like always. I turned off the monitor when we finished, but her image stayed with me. That mix of real vulnerability and the awareness of the impact it would have. Do you think that was the right thing to do? To use a suspicion that intimate as public content? Or do you think it was the only way to find her? The video blew up. Over 1 million views in 2 days. Comments, shares, people tagging friends. Some said they had seen the woman, that she was always near the same corner, that she might mention her name if she was in the mood to talk. We planned the first real search outing like it was just another production. Cameras is batteries, microphones just in case, even though Alejandra insisted that if it was her, she wanted to talk first without recording anything. I remember that morning. The sky was overcast, a pale gray. The kind of light that flattens colors and makes everything look a little sadder. We were in the car, she in the passenger seat, hugging herself even though it wasn't really that cold. I drove in silence. At a red light, she reached over and found my hand. Her fingers were freezing. I squeezed them gently. "If it's not her," she said, "what do I do?" "You help her anyway," I answered, without thinking too much. "Even if she's not Lourdes." She nodded, staring out the window. The glass was fogged up from the air inside the car. With her other hand, she traced an invisible line, like she was writing something in the mist that never appeared. And me, the one who always watches more than he speaks, I couldn't help but notice it. Even in the middle of all that anxiety, there was something deeply human about her fragility. A kind of sensuality that had nothing to do with her body, and everything to do with the way she breathed, held back, trying to steady the tremor. We got downtown and the noise hit like a slap. Honking, voices, street vendors, the smell of fried food mixed with wet garbage. We walked, following the directions the guy who'd filmed the video had given us. 2 blocks, then right, then one more. We saw her before we were ready. On a corner, next to a graffiti-covered wall, there she was. Sitting on a piece of cardboard, hands clasped over her knees. The same plastic bag at her side. The same tired expression. Alejandra stopped dead. "It's her," she whispered. I looked at her profile. Her lips were slightly parted, like the air had been knocked out of her. "Are you ready?" I asked, even though I knew there was no way to be. She took one step. Then another. I followed, a short distance behind, without lifting the camera. In that moment, I wasn't a producer. I was a witness. Nothing more. When Alejandra stopped in front of the woman, it took her a while to raise her eyes. They were dull, as if they'd seen too many things that were better left forgotten. "Good afternoon," Alejandra said, in a voice I didn't recognize. It wasn't the one from her videos, or the one from our late-night confessions. It was a new voice, shaky, held tight. "Are you Lourdes?" The name dropped into the air like a stone into still water. The woman blinked. Her dry lips barely moved. "Who's asking?" she said, with that mix of suspicion and weary habit you only hear in people who've lived too long out in the open. Alejandra swallowed. Her hands were trembling. "I'm Alejandra," she said. "I was born on April 3, 1999. At the General Hospital. You gave me up for adoption." The silence that followed was unlike any silence I'd ever edited in my life. Heavy. Dense. Packed with something I didn't have a name for. Lourdes looked at her more closely. Her eyes moved slowly across her face, as if piecing together broken memories. And then, something shifted in her expression. A kind of recognition, slow, painful. "I had a little girl," she murmured. "A little girl I couldn't keep." Alejandra took another step. Now she was so close she could almost touch her. From where I stood behind her, I could feel the charge in the air. "It's me, Mama," she said. And that word, Mama, came out cracked. Not like the pretty tributes online, no. It came out like a tight, frayed thread. Lourdes lifted a trembling hand toward Alejandra's face. She didn't touch her, stopped a centimeter away. She was afraid too. As if she didn't deserve that contact. "It can't be," she whispered. "My girl. I gave her up so she'd have a home, not the street." And then she started to cry. Not a dramatic sobbing fit. A silent cry, the kind that folds your face inward. Tears that seemed to cost her effort. Alejandra knelt down in front of her, not caring about the filth on the ground. This time she did take Lourdes' hand and pressed it to her cheek. I watched all of it with a strange mix of professional detachment and a lump in my throat. Part of me was analyzing, the framing is perfect, the gray light gives it an almost cinematic tone, the city noise in the background contrasts with how intimate the moment is. Another part of me just wanted to look away, out of sheer modesty. Let me ask you, is it wrong to be thinking about cameras and framing when two people are meeting again after a lifetime? Or is it inevitable, if that's your job and your armor against pain? We didn't record that first encounter. Even though people have asked me about it a lot. The video that went viral later was something else, built with fragments of reality and recreations. But that moment belonged only to them. The story Lourdes slowly unfolded for us in the days that followed was a sad map. A single mother from very young. 2 sons, raised through sheer force, domestic work, cleaning, washing other people's clothes. A life of constant sacrifice, the kind that happens without speeches, simply because there is no other option. When she got pregnant a 3rd time, there wasn't enough to go around anymore. Truth is, there had never really been enough, but now it was impossible to pretend. The hospital social worker talked to her about adoption. Told her, it's the best thing for the baby. She'll have a family, schooling, opportunities. Lourdes signed with her heart in pieces. She promised herself that at least her 2 boys would have more. That this sacrifice would mean something. But the years were cruel. The boys grew up, got strong, hardened. Came adolescence, then their first relationships, then the shame of being poor. In the end, they left her. Literally. One moved to another city without saying goodbye. The other kicked her out of the room they were renting because he needed the space and told her to go find somewhere else. They said I'd already given them enough, she told us one afternoon, sitting on the makeshift bed where she now slept in Alejandra's house. That I'd already done my part. The street was the logical consequence of a society that knows how to live alongside misery as if it were just part of the scenery. Let me ask you, could you abandon your mother like that? And if your answer is no, are you really so sure you've never left her alone in other, subtler ways? 4 months, Lourdes survived on charity, on whatever fell her way, on leftovers. She learned to make herself small, to not be a bother, to become almost invisible. But there was one thing she never let go of, a worn-out plastic bag where she kept the only documents that hadn't been ruined by rain or stolen. Among them, a crumpled paper with Alejandra's name, the date, the hospital. I didn't know if I'd ever see her, she'd say, looking at it like it was a talisman. But I like to think that wherever she was better off than me. When Alejandra heard that, something inside her broke in a way I would only see a handful of times in my life. In private, at night, all that pain turned into something denser. It wasn't just tears. It was also a strange craving for contact, for warmth, for holding on to something alive. I remember one of those nights. She slipped into bed with me almost without saying a word. She moved closer until her body was pressed against mine, her forehead resting on my chest. I could feel her quick, hot breath spreading across my skin. Her arms wrapped tightly around my waist, like she was afraid I might disappear too. There was no rush, no talking. Just the tension of 2 bodies looking for comfort. The brush of her nose against my collarbone, the weight of her leg over mine. The kind of closeness that feels as erotic as it does painful, because it's born out of a wound. Have you ever mixed comfort and desire like that? Do you think it's okay, or is it just another way of running from what really hurts? With Lourdes living under our roof, the dilemma only got more complicated. Alejandra knew that if she told this story, she could help. There were brands interested, foundations, people always hunting for inspiring stories. She could give her mother a roof, medical care, therapy, and at the same time send a message: don't forget the ones who brought you into this world. But there was also that thin line between showing and exploiting. One night in the kitchen, while Lourdes slept in the small room we'd set up for her, Alejandra and I argued. People need to know, she said, leaning on the counter, hair tied up, barefoot, wearing an oversized t-shirt slipping off one shoulder. There are thousands of Lourdes out there. And you're the one who decides which of those stories gets told and which doesn't, I replied, making coffee for both of us. I'm not saying it's wrong, Ale, just that if we show her face, her past, her abandonment, there's no going back. She walked over to me. Her steps were silent on the floor. She stood so close I could feel the heat of her body against my back. Her hands found my waist, her chin rested on my shoulder. Her voice came right against my ear, her breath sending a shiver through me. Do you think she deserves to go on being invisible? She whispered. I closed my eyes for a second. Not just because of the question, but because of what her nearness did to me. Her chest brushed my back with every breath, the thin t-shirt barely separating skin from skin. I think she deserves to choose, I said at last. For us not to be the ones deciding for her again. Alejandra fell quiet. Then she moved away slowly, as if taking the warmth she'd left in me along with her. The next day, we brought the idea to Lourdes. Carefully. No complicated words. There are people who follow me on the internet, Alejandra explained, the two of them sitting on the bed, light coming in at an angle through the window. If I tell them what happened, maybe we can help other people and get resources for you. But only if you want that. Lourdes looked at her for a long time. She had gained back some color now that she was sleeping under a roof, eating 3 meals a day and taking her medicine. But her eyes still held that shadow of someone who's learned not to expect much. If it helps other mothers not end up like me. She murmured. Do it, Emija. Just don't make me say things I don't feel. The condition was clear. Authenticity, even if it hurt. Let me ask you, would you have said yes? Would you sit your mother, who just came in off the street, down in front of a camera to talk about the worst moment of her life? We filmed in the living room. No big lights. No makeup. Alejandra on one side, Lourdes on the other. Me behind the camera, checking audio levels, balancing the frame, while another part of me wanted nothing more than to vanish. Lourdes spoke. Not with the motivational speech a lot of people were expecting, but with a sharp, cutting honesty. She said yes, she signed the adoption papers because she had no way to feed a third mouth. She said she truly believed that at least one of her sacrifices was going to mean something. She said that with time she realized you can't force your children to love you, or stay, or be grateful. She didn't badmouth the two who abandoned her. What she said about them was much harsher. They got on with their lives, she said simply. And in that life, there wasn't a place for me anymore. That video, that one did go viral. The numbers are almost obscene when you set them next to real pain: millions of views, hundreds of thousands of likes, brands writing to offer help, media outlets wanting to interview the influencer who rescued her mother from the streets. Alejandra became a symbol. Lourdes, a kind of saint of sacrifice. And me, always watching from outside, I saw how the story turned into something bigger than them, something we no longer fully controlled. Donations came in. Money to pay for a better place to live, a small house with a yard where Lourdes could grow plants. A clinic offered to treat her for free. Therapists reached out, eager to work on the mother-daughter bond. And something else arrived that we hadn't expected: the 2 biological sons. I'm not going to use their real names. It doesn't matter. One showed up in person, the other sent a message first. Both clung to guilt, confusion, their own poverty, bad advice from others. And yes, also to curiosity about their mother's sudden fame. One afternoon we agreed they'd come over to talk. No cameras. No content. Alejandra was firm on that. Whatever happens in there belongs to her, not to the internet. I was there because Lourdes asked me to be. You already know all my dirty laundry, she said, half joking, half serious. Stay, so my hands don't shake so much. The living room was quiet when they knocked. The younger one came in first, cap in his hands, nervous. The older one followed, stiffer, like he'd been pushed in. Lourdes was sitting in a chair, back straight, in a simple dress Alejandra had bought her. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a tired woman, but dignified. Good afternoon, she said, with a calm that surprised me. Her sons looked at her, and on their faces I saw something I'd never seen before, the shock of looking at the person they'd thrown aside, now surrounded by care, with another daughter at her side who was actually willing to stay. They talked. A lot. Too much for me to repeat it all here. There were tears, there were excuses, there were long silences where the only sound was the aquarium filter humming away in the corner. At one point, the older son said, "We didn't know you were that bad off, Ma." And she answered with a coldness that wasn't cruelty, but clarity. "You didn't ask." That hit of reality knocked the air out of the whole room. Let me ask you, how many times have you said "I didn't know," when the truth is you simply never wanted to ask? In the end, Lourdes didn't throw them out. She didn't rush to embrace them in a burst of instant forgiveness, like in soap operas. What she did was much more human. She shook their hands, made no promises. "I'm an old woman now," she said. "I don't know how long I've got. If you want to come by, come. If you don't, I already know how to live alone." It was her way of taking back control over her own story. After that meeting, Alejandra and I stayed out in the yard for a while, at night. The air was cool, and the smell of damp earth hung around us, because Lourdes had just watered the plants. Alejandra lit a cigarette, something she hardly did anymore, and the smoke drew a kind of gray halo around her face. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked, without looking directly at me. I watched her. The warm yellow light from the porch bulb carved out her cheekbones, the curve of her neck, the soft shadow along her collarbone. Her t-shirt clung a little to her body from the damp night air, hinting at shapes without really showing them. There was a sort of sensual tiredness about her, if that makes any sense, the kind of exhaustion that lowers your guard. I stepped a little closer, just enough to feel that magnetic field that always seems to appear when we're less than an arm's length apart. "I don't know if we did the right thing," I admitted. "But I do know that if we hadn't done it, she'd still be on the street. And you'd still not fully know who you are." She let the smoke out slowly, watching it rise. "Sometimes I feel like I turned my mother's pain into a product," she said. "Even though I know it's helped her. I feel guilty." I dared to touch her hand, gently, sliding my fingers over hers. I noticed the warmth, the slight tremor. "You're not an angel," I told her. "But you're not a monster either. You're a daughter trying to do the best she can with what she got." She turned toward me. Her eyes were shiny, not just from the tears threatening to fall, but from something else. "And you?" she asked. "What are you in this story, Danny?" The question cut right through me. Because up until then, I'd kept myself in the comfortable role of the smart, analytical observer, the one who arranges and judges in silence. But this story had shaken things loose in me too. I have a mother as well. One who isn't on the street, who hasn't been physically abandoned, but whom I've left alone many times, hiding in my work, in my screens, in my own life. I didn't tell her all of that night. But I felt it. And maybe that's why, when Alejandra leaned in and rested her forehead against mine, I didn't pull away. The tension of everything we'd lived through condensed into that millimeter of distance between our mouths that we didn't quite cross, but that somehow felt more intense than a kiss. Let me ask you, how many other people's stories have you used so you don't have to look at your own? Over time, Lourdes' story stopped trending. Like everything on the internet, the wave passed, new ones came, the algorithm started forgetting her. But the important part wasn't in the numbers. What mattered was that now Lourdes had a bed of her own, sheets that smelled clean, a window where the sun came in every morning. She had medicine, a doctor who called her Senora Lourdes with respect, not the old lady on the corner. She had a little yard full of potted plants she talked to like they were children. She had, above all, the ability to choose whom she opened the door to. Her biological sons started visiting her from time to time. Not as often as they probably should, but a lot more than they had in years. Sometimes they showed up with guilty faces, sometimes awkward. Never again as if she were a burden. Alejandra kept being an influencer. But something in her content shifted. She talked less about tips, more about real stories. She still encouraged people to reconcile, yes, but she also talked about the fact that some wounds never fully close. She repeated a phrase she'd heard from Lourdes: there's no obligation to forgive, but there is an obligation not to repeat the same story. And then the messages started coming. From adopted children looking for their mothers, and from biological mothers who, like Lourdes, had given up their babies hoping they'd have a better life. Some of them managed to reunite after seeing her video. Others didn't. But at least they stopped feeling like they were the only ones in the world. One day, while we were recording a special episode, Alejandra asked me to leave the camera on a fixed shot and sit next to her, facing the lens. I don't like being on camera, I already said that. But this time, I agreed. Today we're not just telling my story, she said, looking straight at the camera. We're telling Danny's, too. And yours. The story of all of us who have, at some point, abandoned or been abandoned in small ways. I didn't say much, but I admitted something that cost me. I said that after meeting Lourdes, I started calling my mother more. That I went to see her without waiting for Christmas, that I sat and listened to her, even when her stories were repetitive. Now I'm asking you, the one who's made it this far. Who do you still owe a call? Who do you owe at least a visit, an explanation, a simple "I'm still here"? I don't know if everything we did was right. We used a real story, the story of a woman swept out to the margins, to build a narrative that went viral. Yes, it changed her life. Yes, it helped others reconnect. But there were also brands, monetization, likes. I'm not going to lie to you or try to scrub that clean. The only thing I know is this: the last time I saw Lourdes, she was sitting in her yard, wearing a floral apron, brushing dry leaves off her plants. She looked at me, squinting a little against the sun, and said something very simple. Before, when I lay down on the street, I'd ask God to let me fall asleep and not wake up. Now I wake up and wonder what I'm going to plant today. That's already a lot, isn't it? Yes. That is a lot. And maybe that's where the only thing that really matters lies, not so much in how the story is told, or how many people see it, but in whether the person living it can, in the end, wake up wanting to plant something new. I'm still the man who watches too much, who dissects pain with a certain coldness so he doesn't drown in it. But after Lourdes and Alejandra, I can't look at a body on the sidewalk without wondering who left it there. And I can't look at my own mother without remembering that abandonment also happens when we stop showing up. So you tell me. Do you think Alejandra did the right thing by using her influence to find and help her mother, even if it meant exposing her story to the world? Do you think children who abandon their parents deserve a second chance when remorse arrives late? If you were Lourdes, would you have opened the door again, or left them standing outside? I really want to know what you think. Leave me your answers in the comments, as if we were having this conversation in the dark, whispering, with no one else listening. And if this story stirred something in you, even if you're not sure what, I'm going to ask you for 3 very specific things. Subscribe to the WinOwl channel, so we can keep sharing stories that hurt, but also wake you up. Like this video, so the algorithm becomes, if only for a moment, an accomplice to something human. And share it with that person you know has unfinished business with their mother, their father, their children, or with themselves. In the end, we're all a little bit abandoned children and a little bit distracted parents. The difference is in who dares to come back first. And in whether the other one, when they hear the knock at the door, chooses to open, or lets the echo of abandonment keep repeating itself.